All right, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's Friday Forum. Hopefully our tech is working correctly. We are streaming through YouTube, so you should be able to see and hear us. You may post any questions you have for panelists as they come up in the chat room there. And so here we go. Today's topic is setting the stage, curriculum, school culture, and more. Our norms and expectations are the following. Remember that we all have a variety of roles. We're educators, administrators, family members, community members, and advocates. We are you, so we want to prioritize the relationships. We want to listen passionately, but always keep that positive intent in mind. Be open to discomfort and seek growth. Embrace your vulnerability. We have some shared vocabulary here. Bias, a particular tendency, trend, inclination, feeling, or opinion can be unconscious and unidentified. Privilege, benefit enjoyed only by some, beyond the advantage of most. Microaggression, small, subtle, sometimes unintended acts of discrimination. Non-racist versus anti-racist. We consider, all of us consider ourselves as non-racist. However, anti-racist assumes action. At the end of our set, you'll notice that we will have a list of action steps that you can take based on our panelists' information that they give you. Social justice, the objective of creating a fair and equal society in which each individual matters and their rights are recognized and protected. Decisions are made in ways that are both fair and honest. At the end, you'll see this slide. Be sure if you were wanting PowerSchool credit that you take that survey. The link was also in the email sent out through the JSU In-Service Center. So here's our format. We always utilize the questions that are submitted in the feedback form. So if you have additional questions that you want answered in future forums, please be sure you complete that form. And also today, we're going to take the questions from the YouTube chat room, and we're going to do our best to have a question and answer session at the end. We're going to take approximately 15 minutes of the time at the end for panelists to answer questions. Do your best not to repeat those questions. If you see that question already submitted, then let that be that. We'll do our best to answer as many as we possibly can in that time. I'm going to turn it over to today's moderator.
Hi, I'm Tamika Stevens. I'm a 5th grade teacher at Oscar Adams Elementary, and I'm excited to be your moderator today. Today our first question is, no, I'm so sorry, I got ahead of myself. Let's introduce our panelists.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Nicolette Nalu. I have been in education for almost 18 years now. Most of my area of focus has been in elementary grades. I identify as English is not my first language. I am half Arabic, Middle Eastern. I am half German. I am half Dutch. So a lot of different ethnicities in me, and I am so happy to be here with you guys. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Aisha King, and I come from Mobile, Alabama. I have been an educator for 17 years now. I teach English on the high school level, primarily with seniors. I'm also the English intervention teacher at my school, as well as the English department chair. And you know, like everyone else that will be speaking today, I am very honored and proud to be a part of today's discussion.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Martinez. I've been in education too for about 18 years. I've worked in inner city, rural, and suburban. I teach 4th grade, ELA and social studies, and we're a mixed family and a bilingual household. And my husband's a first generation immigrant, and these topics today are really close to our heart. So I just encourage you to listen and be open to what we have to say today.
Okay. Today, our first question goes to Aisha. How should a teacher ensure he or she has an inclusive classroom environment?
The teacher's classroom environment is a very important place. You know, students spend a lot of time there, and I feel that, you know, as soon as a student walks into a teacher's classroom, they are to feel that inclusion. And that is from everything that's on the walls in the classroom, what you have on your bookshelves, how the desk or tables are arranged. And then, you know, one thing that I know that is very important, how does that teacher communicate how inclusion will look in that class? It is so important that the teacher sets the tone and lets those students know how he or she feels about the importance of a classroom community. You know, I always have a talk with my students at the beginning that, you know, hey, this is a classroom where everyone's voice is welcomed. I don't like to be the sage on the stage. I like to facilitate discussions and let my students know that this is their space, this is their safe space. So I think that all of those things need to be components of an inclusive classroom.
Yeah, and something that I would love to add, I absolutely agree with everything that Aisha said. I think that's all so important, and it all starts from building relationships. That's the whole foundation, is letting the students know that you care, but not just by telling them, it's by showing them every single day. It's part of that classroom environment. One of my favorite quotes that many of us are probably familiar with is from Rita Pearson. And she says, kids don't learn from people they don't like. And I think the majority of us have heard that. And I just feel that that's so true. I think it's also important, being in a bilingual or multilingual person myself, I think it's important to allow students to speak their native language in a school setting as well. I do know that the best way to learn a language is completely immerse yourself. It's kind of like just speaking that language only and only hearing that language. But you do such a disservice to students and not show that respect for where they came from. And I think that's just very important. A couple other things, there are so many books out there to educate students about other nationalities, other ethnicities. There are books, for example, that are even content specific. One of my favorite books that I recently heard about it's called Wilma Unlimited. And it is about Wilma Rudolph. And at age 4, she had scarlet fever and polio. And that's a book that you could use in mathematics, like for comparing decimals. Because why? Because in the 1960s, she was actually the first American to win 3 gold medals in the Olympics. And there are so many other things that you can talk about in the book about facing adversity. That what was school like? Well, she didn't go to school because of her health conditions. And what was it like to be Black in the 1940s and then have polio and then being an Olympian? Things like that I think are so important. There's also another book called Child of Civil Rights Movement. And it's about a little girl named Paula, and she talks about Dr. King and knowing about the march from Selma to Montgomery. That's a great read aloud, and for children to be asked, you know, what do you notice? What do you wonder? What are some things that we can talk about? But like I said, I think it's all based on relationships with students, and also keeping in mind not only different ethnicities, but also trying to see if we can get rid of father-daughter dances or things like that. Some students, some little girls don't have a father figure or a male figure, and that kind of sets them apart from others as well. And then also thinking about gender-specific roles in a classroom. All the boys don't need to take the trash out or move a desk if someone needs help with that. Let the students allow some of the jobs that they would like to do as well.
And I'm going to piggyback off of that just a little bit. With what they've said, you know, relationships is first and foremost for all of that. When these kids understand that this is a safe place, they can take risk, and they'll be more likely to achieve so much more. So just being transparent and vulnerable as a teacher, I struggle. I will butcher the English language like nobody's business. I've been speaking Spanish for 20 years and I teach ELA. So you would think I know how to spell everything, but I make mistakes. And so modeling how will the students react when I make a mistake? Or I have ADHD and I have a hard time concentrating sometimes. So what can I do as an accommodation? And allowing those accommodations in our classrooms, not just for the students that have individual education plans or 504s, or just general ed, letting our gifted kids be comfortable to learn the way they need to learn. And for us to understand that teaching today is not what teaching was before, and thank goodness it's not, and how we can do that to make them feel safe in the classroom so they can achieve so much more. And another thing is for us to model inclusive language. So be specific when we're talking. I like to use big words in my classroom, and I like to use figurative language and idioms and different stories. But if I have ELL students in my classroom or someone just not exposed to those languages, they're going to be really lost. When you have a student that's learning a new language, of course, communication comes first and then reading and writing. And when talking to that student, you might think they're understanding everything I have to say when really they're not fluent in that area yet. So let's make sure that we're doing that as well.
Wow, ladies, I totally agree with everything you said. I really can't add any more to that. So we're going to go on to our next question. And this one will go first to Dr. Nicolette Nailu. Do we unintentionally stereotype certain families? Why? How? And what can we do to be more aware of this bias?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm actually going to start with one of my favorite quotes from Maya Angelou. And she said, "You will face many defeats in life, but never let yourself be defeated." And that's kind of how I wanted to start, because it's like, okay, this is my background. I should be proud of where I came from and where my family is from and the languages that I speak or how I was raised, things like that. A lot of times when you hear the word social justice, a lot of times people just put a wall up and they get very defensive before the definition is even given about, what is social justice. I think many of us have been conditioned to have these deficit mind frames or these deficit views. For example, we hear about achievement gaps all the time, and then we hear about EL students. Well, I know that has changed over the years. It was EL, ELL, ESL. But for me, I always, and I've said this for so long, I like to be referred to as either bilingual or multilingual, because it's just, in the context of school, it makes people think maybe that you have to learn English before any other subject is learned, that type of thing. So I think that's something also important to note. And then translanguaging is huge. It's more than just code switching. Translanguaging is where I'm able to go back and forth in the languages that I can speak, and I can explain to you, for example, a mathematics problem. There's a scenario and I can explain it in English, and then I'm going to explain it in Spanish and help some of my peers through peer tutoring. And I think that's also very important. Labeling students or tracking them, I think, is also something that it makes me think of, like, about, in unintentionally stereotyping. So when we say these parents don't care, these kids can't learn, you're talking to the wrong person, because yes, all kids can learn and parents do care. I don't think there's a parent that's out there that says, I don't care about my child. They may just be doing what they know is best and the only thing that they know to help their child. I also think that, I guess, thinking about, we need to look past our confirmation bias that we may have. Look past the things that confirm what we are already thinking. And there are so many opportunities that students have, like, they bring so many different funds of knowledge with them. I know it's very big in the Hispanic culture. When we talk about Latinx students, we talk about a lot of them grew up cooking with their mothers or their grandmothers. There's a lot of mathematics that goes into cooking. So you may think that they don't know certain things in mathematics, maybe in terms of fractional reasoning, but that's how we get to know our students and get to know their families and their backgrounds, to know actually you do know a lot about this. And once again, it all just kind of goes back to relationships. I have several friends. I have so many friends that are Black, brown, that are part of the LGBTQIA community. It's just, take the time to educate yourself and be knowledgeable about where they come from. One of my very, very best friends, she's a Black female educator, came from a family of both parents worked. They both lived in the same household. And she was telling me a story about her son who, being a Black male, he was compared to some of his older cousins. And because they were troublemakers and maybe they were lazy or something like that, he just had that label put on him. And that's just not fair to him. He was bored in school a lot of the time because he was so intelligent that he wasn't getting pushed. So I think that's also something that we need to keep in mind. And then I'll actually close with this last thing. I think we've all seen, maybe, and if not, it's definitely something to worth looking up. We've all seen those kids that are standing behind that wooden fence, and you're watching a soccer game, and we see, okay, well, equality means that it's the assumption that everyone benefits from the same supports, so it's equal. Well, then we have equity, and everyone gets what they need, and it's more of affirmative action or producing equity. Well, then there's like another picture, and it shows justice. And as opposed to having a wooden fence, why not just have a chain linked fence? A chain linked fence, and that gets rid of the interference, that systemic barrier, if you want to call it that. It gets rid of that, so that inequity is addressed in that way. And then you can also think about another step further: liberation. Why have a fence? Don't even have a fence there. So like I said, that might be something that many of us are familiar with, but just kind of keeping that in mind. And actually, I'll leave you with this. Listening is very important, but hearing is more important than listening. Do you hear me? Do you hear what I'm saying? Do you hear your students? Are you able to actually be empathetic and make connections because you care, because you want to? Be in an ethnography type of mind frame where you want to live in their culture and get to know them.
And I'll piggyback, I'm liking that word today, off of Nicolette too, and just those relationships and how important they are. Our passion as teachers is to watch these children succeed. And when these parents know that that's our hope and goal, and that's their hope and goal too, that we can work together for a plan. There's never a problem that needs to be solved. It's us coming together and making a plan for that. Also, as she said before too, if you've taught for a long period of time, some students you have might remind you of other students in the past. And Aisha too, if you don't mind telling them about that bias quiz later. But just what we assume about different families. And one of my biggest pet peeves is if a family comes in and their English is not perfect, or they do not speak English, does not mean that their intelligence are less, or they're dumb, or that there's not that they're not trying to learn English. My husband has been here for 20 years and he still struggles. I've spoke Spanish for 20 years and there's things that I forget, and all of a sudden my brain will just go blank and I'll forget these words. And so it's not like a lack of want. And I think so many times we see that, but also that communication with those parents. If you do have different language speakers in your classroom, we have so many resources today. Google Translate has come leaps and bounds from where it was before. And we can communicate with those parents through that. Just do not, when you're looking at that and you have other parents that are in your classroom that speak another language, watch out for figurative language and idioms and adages and different things, because they will not translate over. And that'll lead to a lot of confusion. But yeah, I think, just empowering this, and this kind of goes to the next question we're going to talk about too, Tamika as well, about empowering these parents.
Well, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add another perspective to, how sometimes families are stereotyped. A lot of times families are stereotyped based on the actions that we see from the students. So I say it, or I can say it this way. Okay, a student has attendance issues, and we make a judgment based on the fact that this child doesn't come to school. Oh, that's a bad student. This child doesn't care about his or her education, when that's not necessarily the case. Or this child never has materials that they need for the classroom lessons. And with that area, that's where relationships are so important. If I have built a relationship with that student, if this student knows that they can come to me and say, look, Ms. King, my family is having financial issues, or I have these things going on. This is why I don't come to school, or this is why I don't have my materials. Then that helps me as a teacher learn and figure out ways to meet the needs for that child. Because, I just feel as an educator, my focus should be, okay, what basic needs can I fulfill for that child, so that I can get to that lesson and teach them that content, so they don't have to worry about those things.
I'm sorry. Wow, you guys really hit the nail on the head. And Aisha, you came from a totally different perspective. And I think it was an important one, because we do have those stereotypes of, and we put a lot of responsibility on our kids. And as an elementary teacher, they can't drive themselves to school. They can't buy their own clothes. It's certain things that they cannot do, but because we don't know how to communicate with the parents, we put that off on the kids, and so we stereotype. We have these stereotypes for them, and that is so unfair to our students, and then it translates into how effective we are in the classroom. So thank you, ladies, for your points of view. I think that was great. So our next question is for Jennifer. What can we do as educators to make sure that all parents feel not only welcome, but empowered in our classrooms?
And I think this is really where we have to look into ourselves as teachers. If you do not feel comfortable with having parent involvement, we've got to think about what are those problems, what are those things that are making you uncomfortable, and for you to change that and to move forward. Because as a teacher, we should be encouraged and inspired to have parents involved in our classrooms. And that's another thing, going back to building relationships with these parents. I teach fourth grade, and so I have 25 to 30 kids in a class, and I go through and I want to know about each student, but also about their parents, knowing about their home lives and where they come from, so that I can communicate with those parents too. We're in a completely different world right now when it comes to teaching, and we're all, worried about what the fall is going to look like and how we're going to teach, but it also opens up for us to empower these parents. I know math is usually a difficult subject for parents, or if we're doing, a new skill in the classroom when it comes to reading, or we're doing a new unit for social studies. We are blessed with the technology we have today to make videos of it. Yes, it's a lot of work in the beginning, but the payoff is going to be so much more, because not only if they're absent, you have that, mode of communication with them, but also with a parent if they're trying to work with their student and they might not understand how to do that math problem, or understand what vocabulary, like what is a proverb and adage, and having that resource for those parents, but also so those parents will be empowered to help their students and to know what's going on with the classroom and that communication. But also, if you do have kids in your class and their home language is not English, on YouTube, you have the choice to choose subtitles, and they have a plethora of different languages. Now, it takes 24 hours for them to go into place, but what an amazing tool that we have to communicate with those parents and to show them how to do that, and for them to be proud to know how to help their kids at home. And YouTube, you can find it on cell phones. And, a lot of people have cell phones today, and it's an easy resource for them to come to. And I think it's also important for us as parents to be cognizant of our rights as parents. Because I know when my son, he's in high school now, but when he started school, I didn't know what rights I had as a parent. I didn't know that I could ask for testing if I thought my child had a learning disability, or to be tested into the gifted. I didn't know these things. And I think sometimes we're not transparent in the education system with those things. And I think it's, to be active as a parent. And if you see something's not right, to speak up, and to be able, go to your child's teacher and talk to them, because perception's different. I always do a thing in my classroom where I go outside and I look like I'm screaming at a kid and I'm giving them compliments. And the kids are like, why are you screaming at that person? It's just because their perception's different. And so what we might be going through at home and what my child is telling me, and then talking to the teacher, y'all both listening and hearing it out. And if you don't get a result, then follow through. Give that teacher a chance to see and find mistakes if she's making, or find a miscommunication, and help her, not help her, but let her, make those changes and learn, because we've all made mistakes. But to know your rights as a parent, I think is very important.
I just have to say, when you said be transparent, that just like rings bells. You, as a teacher, I just feel like we need to be able to, the saying, knowledge is power. So the more you let your parents know, you let them know when the report is due, when open house is, and the more that you let them know, the more you communicate with them, the more knowledge that they have, the more empowered they feel. And so those are less questions they may have, but when questions do arise, they're going to feel so comfortable to come to you, because you've had an open door policy with your classroom. You've made them feel a part of your classroom. I had a situation this school year where, when I asked my child's teacher about a project, her response to me was, he sits in my class day in and day out, and he knows when it's due. He's 9 years old. My son is highly intelligent. He's in the gifted program. However, he still puts his shirt on backwards. So we still deal with some gifted tendencies there, that dark side of giftedness. So
Tamika, I think you lost sound.
I'm sorry, am I frozen? Am I back? Okay. It came down to where I had to have the board come in, and I really had to let her know that I cannot allow you to break down my child's spirit. I can't allow you to break him down mentally, because it will take me a lifetime to build him back up. His dad and I, we worked so hard to keep our boys in a positive mindset. And I think parents have to have that, they have to feel empowered enough to stand up for their kids and advocate for their kids and say, hey, I need to know this so I can support my children. And so when you said transparency, that just really rung out to me. Does anyone else want to speak on this question?
Well, I just wanted to add, Tamika, I hate that happened to your child. And I've seen that happen in education, but, at least your child has an advocate. And what I am always thinking about are those students who do not have an advocate. Mm-hmm. What should I do as a teacher? I'm on that campus. I know what's going on with that child. How can I advocate for that child when there's no parents that can come and speak, and there can be all kinds of reasons why that parent can't step in. And at the end of the day, that kind of thing, I think of it this way. I'm like, that really doesn't matter if I'm there as an adult in that building and I know that I can do something for that child. And, I think that we need more teachers who have that type of mindset. Like, I mean, I see myself as an educator, yes, but I'm also an advocate. I'm supposed to be there and I'm supposed to speak for what those students need that are in my classroom, so I'm, just adding balance to that point, because you just don't always have parents that are present.
And I think it's good too to encourage our students to speak up with those kids too that don't have a voice, because sometimes those kids don't always feel comfortable coming to us, even if we try everything. But for kids, speaking up for other children in the classroom is a huge thing as well.
Wow, Aisha, you really made a great point. As educators, we have to be advocates too. We have to be able to say, when we see things aren't right, we have to be able to go to our co-teachers and try to just understand where is the breakdown, because it's all for the betterment of the kids. We all are supposed to be there for the children. And you're right, all of our kids don't have the support that they need. That is true. So we're going to go on to our next question, which someone wanted to know, they wanted us to explain the nuances of systemic racism and how they are hidden from those not affected. And I wanted to just give my point on that. And I think what I notice a lot is you have teachers who say, well, I'm not going to, they don't challenge the kids because they feel like, well, they don't have the support at home. So I'm not going to give this project. Or, dad is in jail and it's a single parent home, so we're not going to do too much. Oh no, I don't want to assign that novel. That novel may be too hard for my class. Or I don't want parents to complain because that's a really tough book, but then in the same system where, the same grade at another school, the kids are being challenged. Like, it's like comparing apples and oranges. And do they not have single parents at that school? Absolutely they do. But the culture, the atmosphere is set where the teachers wouldn't dare think, let me not challenge these kids. And so when you're at a predominantly Black school, why is it okay for teachers to feel that way? And I honestly think, and from the conversation that I've had with some coworkers, they feel like they're being helpful. They feel like they're being supportive. Like, I'm doing the right thing. I'm not putting pressure on them. This is too much pressure for them. But you're not preparing them for the real world. When they get into corporate America, the boss is not going to say, Jennifer, you had a 2-parent household, so your project is due today. Tamika, you grew up in a 1-parent household, so your project is due 2 weeks from today. No, the project is due today, or you're out the door. You're not setting them up for the real world, and you're not preparing them. And that is unfair, and you're doing our kids a disservice. And it bothers me to my core. And I've spoke out on it. I've said it several times. I've been accused of making my co-teachers feel like they were racist. I'm not sure how I can make you feel like you're racist, but because I spoke out against that, but I'm going to continue to speak out against that. Challenge our kids. Challenge our kids, because I want that for my own kids. So I want that for the kids that I teach. But does anybody else want to speak on that?
Tamika, you touched on something that is like one of my soapboxes, and I can talk about that all day. Because, first of all, the teacher should have high expectations, period, of every student that comes into the classroom. And I'm a firm believer that when you have the expectation, when you set the standard, the students will meet that standard as long as you are there to help them meet that standard. So, if I want to give my students a particular project, or if I want them to read a particular book, I can do what I can do in my power to make sure that I feel that need and they can still have that educational experience. I just think a lot of times, you see educators who will just sit back and let that happen instead of being very intentional, thinking critically about what their actions will do to that child and how it will impact that child in the future. So to say, oh, I have this classroom full of, these students, and no, they can't do this because, they didn't have a strong foundation. Well, teacher, do you know how to build a foundation? If the answer is yes, build it and help those students get to where they need to be. It may take more work for you, but you chose this profession. That's what you're supposed to do. Get out whatever tools that you can and help those children.
And I'll
No,
say,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
look, I was going to say, Tamika, if your microphone would have been on, we would have heard, yes, go, Aisha, and yes, and that too. Like your head was just going. And I know the rest of ours was too. And I will add to this, like what you guys are saying, I love, and you're so right. And, and it goes back to what Aisha was saying a while ago. I've worked in so many schools where, whether it's daylight savings time or not, those kids may be late for school every single day until the sun comes out because they don't have power at the house. And you're worried about if they brought a pencil to school. And it's, like, come on, just start thinking about that. I had a teacher come up to me one day and said, hey, Nicolette, this one little girl in my class, she's having difficulty memorizing her multiplication facts. We're not going to get into that. That's a whole other story. But I said, well, what's going on at the house? What's going on? Well, her mom is dying of cancer and something. Stop. Like, get to know your students. Why are they acting the way that they are, or what is going on? And once again, another student I had when I taught kindergarten, precious little girl with sickle cell. She had sickle cell, and she had so much anger in her, and she was like one of the smallest in my kindergarten class, and she was beating up all these other students, just constantly beating them up, and she's 5. And I told her one day, I said, hey, what's going on? I was like, you sound a little nasally. What's going on with you? And well, my mama was beating up my daddy last night and the police came. And like, just taking the time to listen to this 5-year-old of why she's hitting all these students and allowing her to tell me about herself and her home situation. It's, she did not get in trouble per se, as much as she did before I knew that. Like, hey, what is going on? Okay, well, now I know why. And like I said, just taking the time. And, it makes me think of, once again, another quote from Gandhi: be the change that you want to see in the world. So we can think about all these things that we want to do. If you're not familiar with the organization TOTOS, it's Mathematics Equity for All Students. At first, when I co-presented at the conference with a fabulous colleague of mine and friend, it was very shocking. I was thrown back a little bit, but I have learned so much from being a member of that organization, attending many of the professional development sessions that they have, knowing how to be an advocate. Well, their position paper talks about 3 main things, and it talks about acknowledging that there are systemic barriers, acknowledging that there are things going on, and then talking about actions. Well, I can say I'm going to be an advocate. I am not racist. I'm anti-racist. I'm this. I have friends that are Black, brown, the LGBTQIA community, everybody. But where's that accountability piece? And those are the 3 main points in that position paper by TOTOS, is that accountability piece has got to be there. It's more than just talking about, I love all kids and I love all nationalities. You can read about them in a book, But I go back to what I said before, is really take the time to get to know somebody. Go talk to somebody that's not like you, and really take the time to understand what they're saying.
I absolutely agree. The next question is for Aisha. How does curriculum help sustain and or perpetuate racial biases? You're muted. You're muted. You're muted.
I'm sorry. Okay. What I was saying is that, in the area of curriculum, that's one of those very controversial areas, because it is a tool that is used, yes, to help give students the skills and the knowledge they need once they go out and they, go into the workforce, college and career. But it's also one of those things that filters out into what we see going on in our nation today. You have people who do not have a firm foundation in a diverse curriculum. They have been primarily taught one perspective. And so they have this inability, not everyone, but many of them have an inability to broaden their perspectives and to go and seek out and learn about other people, other cultures, other races, right? So, as an English teacher, I've heard curriculum issues pertaining to race come up this way. Well, we're given the pacing guide and we're told what we're supposed to teach, and I have to stick with that. Or, I just don't know where to begin to look for these things. And, I already have so many things that are going on with the other stuff that I have to teach, it's just too difficult. Or I have even been told, I'm white, I can't teach about, Black issues, or I can't teach about, Latina issues or anything else. I'm white, like someone who is from that community needs to be the person to teach it. But in saying all that, it's very ironic that no one has ever said to me, Aisha, how are you able to walk into a classroom and teach text from white people? I teach Shakespeare, no one bats an eye. But if I want to come in and I want to teach Ralph Ellison, or if I want to teach, something from Zora Neale Hurston or Alice Walker, then, the eyebrows are starting to raise. Like, why are you going to do that? So I feel this way. It does not matter to me what the racial makeup is of my classroom. My students deserve to hear about multiple perspectives. Now, one of the courses I teach is British literature. It's very hard to bring in diversity into British literature. I'm sorry, it is difficult. But this goes back to the first question about having an inclusive classroom. I have text around my room by Pablo Neruda, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. They see other texts in my classroom that they are free to pick up, look at, read, ask me about, where I can help fill in those gaps, right? But then at the same time, I'm someone who's very intentional about bringing in diverse voices. And I think that's where it boils down to. As long as I'm teaching the standards that I'm required to teach, and it's preparing them, it's rigorous, it's fulfilling all of those other, check marks that we have in education, what does it matter what type of text I'm using to do that? Because I'm still doing my job, right? So I think it takes that educator to be very intentional and very focused and really giving a critical eye to that curriculum they have been given, and say, okay, here is a place where I can pull in another diverse voice. Here's a place where I can pull in another perspective and present that to the students in a educated manner. Like it's not indoctrinating them to let them see multiple perspectives. One of my charges as an English teacher is to teach my students how to think critically, how to analyze. They cannot do that by looking at one perspective. They need to see multiple perspectives. So, I'm going to stop because I can talk about curriculum all day, but but it's just very important that that teacher be intentional on what they're bringing into that classroom.
Our next question kind of goes along with it. If you don't mind, Tamika, I'll just read it. And it said,
That's perfect. Go ahead, Jennifer.
okay. It said, how do you confront ideas of white supremacy in an adopted history curriculum or curriculum violence? And I think first we have to recognize that history is written with bias. And we have white supremacy in our history books. You have to go back and look who wrote these history books, who wrote this text that we're using. And as teachers, as Aisha was saying, that we've got to go in there and be critical thinkers as we're doing this. In the 4th grade classroom, I can use whatever curriculum that I'm giving along with primary resources. If I'm doing slavery, okay, we've got this in our text, but let's compare it to this. Or if we're reading a picture book and this is one of my pet peeves, and all of these sweet slaves are just having a wonderful time and smiling. Okay, that's one thing we've got to stop doing. And then look at that and compare to these real accounts and put these lives and the struggles and the perseverance they went through along with this and compare these two things. We've got to stop reenactments. I don't even think I have to say that, but we see it in the news constantly. Whoever thought that was the idea, I really don't know. And we've got to know what we're teaching. Like, I have taught Thanksgiving forever, and I have been guilty of this. But really, when we look back at Thanksgiving, it was really 12 sentences written by 2 white settlers. One wrote 6 sentences, the other one did. And it didn't, like the Thanksgiving we think of was in the Ladies' Home Journal during the Civil War. So we've got to think, we've got to go back to tradition, not go and follow through with tradition, but really investigate and be active of it. And our history was so influenced by the lost cause and different things from the Civil War that, the adults around us believe it because that's what they were taught. And so we have to be active and critical in looking at our history and what our history books are saying and taking primary accounts and comparing those 2 resources. That's one of our standards in ELA, is to take 2 different resources and compare those and to see the differences. And then we also really have got to encourage and be purposeful when we're choosing books. There's a great book, it's Brick by Brick. And when we're looking in the classroom, we always want to get these hero stories talking about slavery and who, found their freedom, when that didn't really happen to everybody, but it didn't make them less of a hero. And so I think it's very important for us to show the true things that happened in history. And Brick by Brick is a story about how slaves built Washington, D.C. And there's not a fairy tale ending because we all want to put a smile on everything, but it's real and what happened there. And so kids can make that real connection with what happened in our past. And I think it's very important. And we can't omit the ugly parts in history or things that don't make us feel comfortable. And whether that goes to parts of slavery or whether that goes to LGBTIA experiences that have happened in our history. We've got to include all of these because we have all these students in our classrooms. And what connections they make with what we're teaching in our classrooms can change them for a lifetime. So even if it makes us feel uncomfortable, we've got to include this history. We've got to tell these truths so these kids can make decisions themselves.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. All right, ladies, we're going to switch to answering questions from our participants. I've been sending these to you if you'll pull that up. If you don't mind, we'll just, I believe Nicolette is first. So Nicolette, we just happen to have 1 question per each person, unless some additional ones get added. So we'll go ahead and start. So Nicolette, if you'll get us kicked off. There's some context there that's up to you. The participants are aware of it. It was in the chat room, but it is for you.
Yeah, so I love this question that came into me. So how do we support parents in becoming better advocates for their children? So as I mentioned in the beginning, when I was explaining who I am and where I come from, being a first generation US born citizen, I actually just had a conversation with my parents the other day. And like I said, my dad being from the Middle East and my mom being from the Netherlands, that whole thing about German being my first language, that's because mom knows German being Dutch. Dad lived in Germany for 15 years, hence the reason that was our first language. But I asked them, I said, here are some things that I can remember growing up, kind of going through school. So first of all, I had to go to this child development center to learn English. Like I learned English from watching Sesame Street. That's what mom said. And then going to this developmental school. Well, right off the bat, I'm different. You know, why am I different? Why? And in growing up outside of Detroit, Michigan, there's a big middle. So Michigan is one of the biggest Middle Eastern populations outside of the Middle East. So there were a lot of kids that looked like me, which I'm a little bit lighter toned than a lot of my cousins, but very dark features. And my parents had to stand up for us and stand up for, you know, hey, if you have questions at school, you need to ask your teacher. Don't come home not knowing how to do something. So they put a lot of that on us. Another great resource, I think, for parents is, and this is going to be put in the resources folder, this website. It's Maria Zavala. .com, and I believe maybe /about, but like I said, it's going to be in the resources. She is phenomenal with anything and everything that has to do with social justice, equity. Marta Seville is also an amazing researcher in mathematics, but she talks and does a lot of research on communities and family involvement. There was a student in one of my schools that spoke Arabic. And when I found that out, and I mean, no English really, I went up to him and some of his siblings and was talking to them and having little conversation in Arabic. And you should have just seen their faces just light up like, who is this white looking lady talking to me in my language? And how are you at this school? And every single day until they left that school, every time I walked in, they made a point to run down the hallway, wave to me, hi friend, hi friend. Like, it's just getting to know them. But this little boy did not eat lunch in the cafeteria several days, like at a time, like the teacher just didn't know what was going on. Well, one of the days I found out it was like a hot dog. If you're not from places that eat hot dogs, you don't know what that is. And that child was terrified and he was crying. He did not want to eat. And, you know, it may seem just crazy and you're like laughing, you know, but it's like, you got to think about little things like that. It's a completely different culture shock. And my parents also had to be advocates for my brother and sister and I when we moved to Alabama from Michigan, which all you hear is, oh, do they have Pony Express there? Is everybody picking cotton? Are they like just comments that people make? And then it's, you know, even getting to know a student. And I know that they talked about this quite a bit in the session last week about, I was not raised to say yes, ma'am, and yes, sir. It's very respectful if I say yes or no versus yeah, yep. So when I said yes to my third grade teacher, when we first moved down, she said, yes, what? Yes, I understand you. No, yes, what? Yeah, like, yeah, yes, I don't know what you're asking me to say. And that was very hard for my brother and sister and I. And it goes back to what Jennifer even said, just linguistic things, speaking slang. So it's just a whole culture shock for a lot of parents and a lot of students. And we've got to be there as parents to advocate for them, as teachers to advocate for these kids and make them feel like they belong just like everyone else belongs. And I think it's a little more difficult to do that in the South. You shouldn't read Black History Month books only during Black History Month. The only time we talk about anything Hispanic, Latinx, Dia de los Muertos. That's it. Only talk about it at that time. And
Just for the
Chinese
mail.
New Year. What? Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's just, why can't, and it's like what Aisha was saying, what Jennifer, what everyone is saying, like, you don't have to just do it during that time. You should be implementing different cultures and books throughout the whole curriculum, throughout the whole school year, and making everyone truly feel included. But thank you for that question. And hopefully I answered that, is just getting to know your students and where they come from, and knowing that their parents are the first teachers in their lives, and having respect for what the funds of knowledge that the parents also can bring to the classroom.
Okay, well, my question is, how do I push purposeful inclusion in a high school classroom? Well, we've kind of answered this somewhat throughout what we've been saying, and even with what Nicolette just said in terms of making sure it's a daily or regular practice in the classroom is important. I think it just really boils down to, you know, a lot of times, because as educators, we're often always told what we should be doing, that a lot of us don't move unless we are told. And you have to be a teacher that knows that whether or not the administrator tells me I need to be more inclusive, I know I need to be more inclusive. So let me do what I need to do to be that. So, you know, I don't think we can look to other entities to start telling us and guiding us in that direction. I think it takes that teacher knowing what he or she needs to do and saying, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to be intentional about it every day. You know, in my school, we're expected to have a bell ringer and an essential question on the board. That's something that I know as a teacher, I must have up every day, because I don't know if an administrator is going to walk in and you know, look for that or expect to see something, right? So I need to be that intentional about making sure that my classroom is inclusive. I need to know that each and every day I need to provide space. It might be a time where, you know, like I told you earlier, I teach British literature. Hard to have diversity in that British literature classroom. So what I can do is I can create a lesson that has my students collaborate, where every voice is heard in that classroom. I can have a discussion that pulls on every perspective in that classroom and not just certain ones, or, you know, students just sit there and listen to me. So, you know, it really takes that educator to get the tools. And I will also add, it helps to find other teachers who will support you in your building, where you can build a community and you can say, hey, you know, I need help with this particular lesson, or I feel like I'm having issues with bringing in diverse voices or perspectives in my classroom. How can you help me? And allow another teacher to support you as you become more inclusive.
Thank you, Aisha. We're going to turn over to Jennifer for a question from the panelist.
I'm going to go really quickly. It says, if you work in a predominantly white school system which sees no issues, where do you start? There's bring up conversation. If you're doing topics, if you're doing news of today, that topic is organically going to come up. And I think it's a great way to start a platform for that. It should be a discussion, because in life, it's not going to be predominantly white. They need to know how to recognize their biases in different things. They need to recognize empathy for other people that might not be the same for them. So it is a problem. because we need to encourage that diversity. And I know not every school is going to have that diversity, but those conversations need to be open. That needs to be carried on. And a quick comment, someone made a comment about being an advocate for a student and got in trouble. Sometimes we got to be troublemakers, and sometimes we've got to get in trouble. So, it's hard. Sometimes, like speaking today, some of these topics are controversial, but we are the voice for these kids. This is our priorities as teachers, are to watch after these children and to make a difference in their life. So yeah, we might get in trouble sometimes and we might be put in a hard situation, but it's for the better.
All right, I'm gonna tack onto that real quick. I want to say, as white allies, we have a responsibility to be stepping in and advocating to ensure that doesn't happen. It shouldn't have to be. It shouldn't have to be a Black teacher that sees it to step in. That the specific one was a Black teacher taking up for a Black student. Wrong is wrong. And we have got to learn to be willing to put ourselves on the line. And I'm going to I love the troublemaker line. That is important. It shouldn't even be considered troublemaking. We should be advocating for our students. Wrong is wrong. All right, Tamika, will you answer our final question, and then we'll close out with our action steps and our survey.
Yes. What do I do when I see a student that has a need that is not being met from other staff members? Just from experience, I say you go straight to the student's need. I can't be concerned as to why that staff member or members are not addressing that need. I have to go straight to the student's need, whether it's food, whether it's clothing, or whatever it is. And if that
Tamika, you're locked up again.
there are probably 10 other students that have this need. And so, and then we can start to address, okay, I know I wasn't the only one to see that. So I want to know, did you not feel comfortable saying anything? Because I want to understand my coworkers, and I want to understand their thoughts. But my first thing is to go and address the need of that student and get that taken care of first. And then go to my co-teachers and try to see where their thought process.
All right, ladies, let me pull up our action steps and we'll close out with that. All right, so our action steps as we walk away from the session today: relationships. We'll keep repeating this theme also through the next two sessions. The relationships with our students break down so many barriers. Kids don't learn from people they don't like. Take time to educate yourself. This burden should not lay upon the shoulders of our friends of color. We need to get out there and do our part and educate ourselves. We can all increase our tolerance, our awareness. Know where students come from. Be aware of confirmation bias. Listening is good, but hearing is vital. Communication, connection with families, help empower them all. Hold high expectations for all students. They don't have a strong foundation, well, then build it. That's our role as educators, the reason we went into this job. Literature is a mirror and a window, and students deserve to have that opportunity. Be sure you have a diverse library in your classroom, and as well as the library within your school. Multiple perspectives reflecting a diverse world. Be intentional about inclusivity, diversity, celebration of all. Advocate if necessary. Be a troublemaker. The next sessions, next week will be Simple Truths Addressing Systemic Racism, then Draw the Circle Wider on July 24th. And the information on all of these can be found in our resources folder. And the last one we'll wrap up with July 31st, will be Cultural Context, Beliefs, Values, and Practices. Here is the QR code. You cannot click on the link, but it is a tiny URL if you would like to copy it down. The same link was also included in the email you received with the YouTube link, but you can use your phone to scan the QR code. Remember, if you're wanting to receive PowerSchool credit, you must both be registered prior to the session. I have no power over PowerSchool, which is incredibly ironic. So be sure if you're going to be joining our future sessions that you register ahead of time and complete the survey afterwards. And we turn that list into the JSU In-Service Center and they apply that credit. And please allow a couple of days for them to do that. Panelists and moderator, we thank all of you so very sincerely. Thank you for your time and your wisdom and sharing your thoughts and ideas and wisdom with us. We will leave this slide up for those who need to copy down the tiny URL or need to scan the QR code to receive credit. And also keep in mind that feedback is so incredibly important. It's how we design our upcoming sessions. It's how we select questions for the upcoming sessions. So please don't hesitate to include those. Be very specific with your questions. A lot of times we have people who use a great number of pronouns, and sometimes we're not really sure when you say, how do I do this or that, we're not 100% certain we know what this or that is. So be very specific in your questions so that we can include it in future sessions. Thank you all for attending. Panelists, do you have anything to add while we leave this slide up? All right, I'm gonna give it one more minute and then I will end our live feed. Is there anybody who needs a little more time? If you do, if you just drop it into the chat room on YouTube and I'll see that and leave that up if need be. You can always rewind it. And is that even a term anymore? Back from the cassette days, because I'm so old. All right, it appears that everybody has what they need, so we'll end our live stream and we look forward to seeing everybody next week.